On today's episode, we're going to be getting inside a composer's mind. Yes, I have invented a machine that will get us inside of her brain. No, I'm so bad at accents. And speaking of bad accents, I'm going to try to pronounce her name in French. MarieClaire Saindon. She is from Montreal. She is a choir and film composer, and we have a fascinating conversation where we get to talk about her commission work and actually not really composing for herself. She's also a violin / fiddle player, and we get to talk about the difference between when do you call it a violin, when do you call it a fiddle. We get to hear a lot of her compositions and her use of claps and stomps in her choirs. She has great tips for up-and-coming composers, whether for film or for choir, and we get into much more. So sit back, although you're probably not sitting. You're probably like washing the dishes or walking the dog or driving a car. Well, I guess driving a car, you do sit back. Anyways, enjoy the episode, no matter what you're doing.
Only after I got out of my bachelor's degree that I went, what actually interests me? So I'm trying to do film music, and it's not quite working because I haven't actually studied in film music. I'd studied in contemporary music, so I wasn't part of the community, right? And if you don't have any network, the community is network, right? So if you don't have any connections, then how do you do a film? At the same time, that's when I started singing in a choir. I got a choral commission where they're like, we have a grant. We're going to fly you to Reno, Nevada, and you can be at the premiere. And I'm thinking, like, what? You can do that with choir music?
Welcome to the One Planet Music Podcast, where we explore the role of music in an ever-changing world. As a listener, you'll gain motivation, inspiration, and practical knowledge from fellow musicians and music professionals who are making an effort to perfect their craft while having meaningful impact. I'm your host, Daniel Rinaldi. Before we sort of like dive in, I did want to check in though, like how are things going where you're at with this global crises pandemic?
Well, both of us are musicians, so we're not obliged to go out at all, which we don't. So we have our weekly trip to the grocery store armed with everything to go there, and everything's really closed off and quiet in Montreal, which is not usual, but otherwise we're fine. We're safe.
Is there something specific that when people go grocery shopping, like in the US, it's been toilet paper? It's like everybody's going crazy over toilet paper. In Montreal, is there anything specific?
Well, because it's been going crazy in the States, then, people reacted similarly after seeing news that toilet paper was running out. So that kind of echoed here. No, I think what really was the most impressive is all the plexiglass separators between the cashiers and the customers, and how the cashiers will like clean the conveyor belt before every new customer, and they're cleaning all the grocery cart handles, and it's like maximum 50 people per giant grocery store. It's very
Well, MarieClaire, I would love to just get started hearing a little bit more about your upbringing, and I would be very curious to hear, what is your earliest memory of music?
That's a great question. My mother was a singer-songwriter, so music has been part of my fetal growth, I guess. She was still singing and writing while I was in the womb, so it's been surrounding me ever since. And she'd been, ever since I was able to hold a violin and play 1-4-5-1, I'd be on the stage with her, trying to play little melodies or harmonizing. And the older I got, the more I got involved in her shows. So it started off that way.
From what I could hear, it's sort of like music was always with you from the womb. Before you got into becoming a composer for choir and film, and we'll get into that, were there any other things you were exploring? Like, were you, I don't know, interested in being an architect or, designer, anything like that? Or was it always music?
I was playing it dangerously. It was always music.
Nice.
So the only if was, or was when I went into high school. I managed to get into an arts high school in Ottawa. Yeah, that's in. I don't know who your listeners are about Ottawa, so being the capital of Canada, and that's generally an English-speaking city, but there's also a lot of French communities. So I managed to go into the only arts school that is high school that is French speaking in the province, and it has a fantastic program. And it was between, should I go with voice or should I go with violin? And I think the thing that really really convinced me is I did a competition not too long before, and I had a really bad cold and I had to sing. And I remember after that competition, I went, nope, never again. I'd rather play violin and be able to hold my instrument while still having a sore throat. This sucks, So that's how I chose
Maybe
that.
your life would be different right now if, like, the day before you broke your wrist.
Yeah, it might be, to be quite honest, because somehow I still got back into choral music, but I wonder if I would have been as enchanted with choral music had I really trained really hard. Because in my high school, our teacher, our vocal teacher, had a very strong choir, treble choir, and did all kinds of projects with them. And I wonder, because violin basically became my main instrument for university, for composition, and I didn't even touch vocal composition until I was out of university.
So yeah, how did you get into composing for? Let's take one at a time, because you do choral and you do film. Let's look at choral first. How did you get into that?
So choral was actually my first step and my last step. I first got into choral writing specifically because of my teacher, Robert Fiddle, in my high school. He threw a kind of a curveball to everybody who was in music. No matter what instrument you played, you had to take theory classes too at school. And during my last year, he told everybody in all the theory classes of the 2 last years, saying, okay, guys, there's a choral composer that's fairly famous in the States and in Canada. He's coming to do a project with our choir. And just for the heck of it, I want all of you guys to write a choir piece. And he's going to judge them, and he's going to, my teacher would select four finalists, and then the guest composer would come in and pick a winner.
No pressure.
And no pressure. And long story short, I ended up winning the competition, but the composer then said, hey, just give me your music, and I'll forward it to Boozy and Hawks with a letter of recommendation. Let's try to get this published. And it worked.
Wow. Incredible. And so this was back in high school, did I hear correctly?
Yeah, that was back in high school.
Okay. When would you say that's maybe when you got a taste like, okay, I can do this? When did you start looking at it like, I can do this professionally? And maybe when did you get that first, that check for being a composer?
After my bachelor's, I received my first check, and I was quite surprised at the amount of copies that were sold. So I did my entire bachelor's degree not even thinking about choral music. For some reason, I don't know what happened in my head, but I was going at McGill, and in my head, McGill is a very avant-garde school, and it is. And for some reason, I thought choral music couldn't be avant-garde. And so I never wrote for voice. I wrote for everything else but voice. So I didn't write any other choral piece while I was in my bachelor's degree. And it's
because you were interested in avant-garde.
No, I thought I had. It was one of those quote shoulds, unquote, like one of those mental shoulds that you kind of create in your head if you're one of those people that has a bit of anxiety and trying to see like, oh, what am I supposed to do to, make things work, as opposed to what really interests me. So it was a little bit of a dishonest move on my part. I really wanted to do film music, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit now.
Sure.
So right before I graduated from high school, that's when Lord of the Rings came out. And so I was like, oh, nice. This is wonderful. I must do film music so I can be in projects like this and collaborate with people, which it didn't go through my head that you could collaborate in other ways with other groups. But anyway, so that had enchanted me. And that was my goal. Like, let's go to university, let's learn how to compose. And then I'll just take all this avant-garde crazy stuff that they will probably teach me. And then at the end, I'll start seeing what I like and then create develop my own voice. Whereas you go to McGill and they expect you to have an interest. They expect you to come in with ideas, and I did not. So it was very hard to figure out where I wanted to go, how I wanted to deal with this. And that's why it's only after I got out of my bachelor's degree that I went, what actually interests me? So I'm trying to do film music, and it's not quite working because I haven't actually studied in film music. I'd studied in contemporary music, so I wasn't part of the community, right? And if you don't have any network, the community is network, right? So if you don't have any connections, then how do you do a film?
Definitely.
So I'd received my first check from the choral piece that I published, and at the same time I went into my master's degree, and that one was specifically film music, which was really cool. I learned quite a bit, but I still didn't quite get to network that much. At the same time, that's when I started singing in a choir, thinking, all right, so I got this check, and then I got my first commission ever during my first year of a master's. I got a choral commission where they're like, we have a grant. We're going to fly you to Reno, Nevada, and you can be at the premiere. And I'm thinking, like, what? You can do that with choir music? And so that kind of made me think a little more.
Light bulb moment.
Light bulb moment. So I went, and I'd written this piece that I personally was quite proud of. And I remember sitting in the concert, and they did a great job, but I was sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, I wrote something that's way too hard for them. Clearly, I don't understand registers, or like I don't understand choral textures. Like I hadn't sung in a choir, and I hadn't written anything else for choir. So it's that moment of, okay, if I want to do this, which, you know, this whole traveling thing is fun, and meeting people is fun, and collaborating is fun. So if I really want to do this, let's sing in a choir. And I didn't quite realize what I was getting into, because I auditioned for a fairly advanced choir in Montreal, and I think I got in by pure luck, because they were losing like half of their membership, because it happens once in a while. Just new people go in, and then the same group of people kind of leaves at the same time. So they had many places to fill. I got in, and then it's the mere fact of singing through about 60 pieces in 1 year and memorizing everything and doing everything by heart under the direction of a very advanced conductor who's also very community minded. That did it for me.
Now, so let's say your taste for film started when you watched Lord of the Rings, or for film music, actually, for film scoring. But tell me a little bit more, like what really interested you in getting into film scoring?
So I remember really first watching and hearing Gattaca and with the music by Michael Nyman, and that I really loved. I think it was 12 or 13 when I watched that with my family, and I just remember being enchanted with some of the textures you would hear in film music that you wouldn't necessarily hear in like a classical piece by Mozart or Beethoven, or pop music, which is the other stuff that I would be listening to on the radio. So for me, it was just a new, different texture and color. And I loved the pairing of different arts together. So it wasn't just music, but it was music that was enhancing a mood or enhancing a message.
Right.
And as a parenthesis, this is also something that really pushes me forward towards choir music, because it's pairing music with poetry. Again, so going back to film music, I really enjoyed watching a film and then trying to understand why certain types of music were written for certain types of moods or scenes. And then I discovered that I absolutely enjoyed whatever little tiny films some of my friends would do and we would just do on the side. And I really loved trying to really support the image and trying to take whatever message they were saying or whatever intent they had and try to amplify that for them.
I want to come back to film scoring in a little bit. Temporarily, I would love to frame the conversation a little bit more. MarieClaire, what motivates you and what inspires you to compose?
I'm still questioning myself on this one. I just do it, and if I don't do it, I feel like I'm missing something. On a personal level, I feel like specifically with choral music, I feel like I get to explore philosophy and themes and ideas that I normally would not. specifically because my commissioners, being in the choral world, tend to be also very aware of certain social issues or mental issues that can be expressed through text. And they tend to program their concerts around such themes. And then they'll come to me and say, can you write a piece about a woman who's in the STEM field? All right. So that's one of my next projects. So look up about Katherine Johnson, the astro. See, I haven't read her biography yet. Mathematician who helped bring the first men to the moon. Things like that. So what are the role of these women that were mathematicians that were basically living computers? And so these are topics that I would never really research on my own, but then it kind of puts me in somebody else's shoes. And then I try to express that through music.
Do you find yourself composing more for your commissioners? And like in this example that you gave, they gave you a context, they gave you a purpose, a direction, like a starting point. When do you get to find yourself like composing for yourself, like just for any particular idea that you have?
I don't do that. I solely write music because I seek out the collaboration. So it's either I'm commissioned or I talk to a friend and this person has a text, an idea. It's always the collaborative side of things that I really, really appreciate. Of course, I go on my own and I produce whatever I need to produce for the project. But for me, the excitement comes from giving birth to a new idea with somebody else. So
following that same logic, where would you say these ideas come from? Because if like these musical ideas, right? Let's say the director or the writer gave you, sort of a context, a story, a theme, but then it's up to you to musicalize that concept or that theme. Where is that coming from? How do you do it?
I always start with structure. To be quite honest, what I do is know if it's either film or choral music or whatever it is, I try to restrict as much as possible all the parameters. So instrumentation, ranges, volume, form, structure, textures, and I decide all of these things depending on how they would affect the mood or the theme or the arc of the piece itself. And then once I actually write the melodies and write the harmonies, those are the last things I think of. And those are what I leave to inspiration most of the time. And if inspiration does not hit, then I try to play through things or sing through things until something sounds okay, and then I go from there. So that inspiration, that's the that's the thing that usually will go, I do not know where it comes from. And that's where a lot of different people's beliefs are different. So I could just say, well, it's all my brain synapses that are spitting out whatever I've learned or heard over the years, which I'm sure it's part of it. Other people will have more spiritual answers. Me personally, I'm a Baha'i, and there's a very big emphasis on music and how music is a ladder for the soul. So it does have a connection to the divine. So if the music that I am writing, if the intention is as pure as possible, then I believe that inspiration flows through very nicely. But if I'm not in a very spiritual place, inspiration usually does not come very easily.
Sure. Yeah. Do you ever find yourself having to compose for, let's say, a scene in a film or where you're not really inspired? Maybe you're not connected to it in any particular way. Maybe for some reason it doesn't resonate with you, but you still have to compose something. How do you work around that?
I haven't written, to be honest, I haven't written a lot of music for actual films. I've done a lot of music libraries for a very specific company that had very elevated ideals to begin with. So that helped a lot. So DDC International, they usually would make videos about nonprofit organizations, local organizations from all over the world. It'll be like public health or local industry. And it's really encouraging as a whole as far as projects goes. And I didn't...
So more documentary style.
Yeah, more documentary style. What was interesting with that company is that they would tell me what the project is about, and then they would say, well, write some music that are in such and such and such a mood. So like either a 2 or 3 minute track that's motivational, or like 2 or 3 or 4 tracks that are motivational if it's a big project. And then like do 2 or 3 that are kind of neutral, 2 or 3 that are kind of rhythmic. And then it's like, it comes from this country. So maybe have like an instrument that gives the flavor of this country without actually like ripping out a complete, they're like a folk tune and throwing it in there, not even knowing what it means, and then go from there. So as far as film, I've really just worked on one documentary, and it was about the immigration of the Irish into Quebec during the Irish famine in 1847. And there was nothing in that film that was not inspiring for me. Maybe some were like a little more neutral, but like as a whole, the project itself was quite interesting.
Now, is this the piece that you sent me called, is the film called La Belle Françoise?
So the film is called
Am I correctly?
Yeah, that's fine. The film is called Carrix, and the cue that you have, it is a traditional cue, but I allowed myself to actually use a traditional piece because I am French Canadian and I do have those like French Canadian / Irish roots. So I permitted myself to use some of these traditional tunes in there. So this is La Belle Françoise, which is a French traditional piece, but with Irish flavor around it.
So going with the documentary theme or music for film, there's another piece you sent me for the Baha'i National Center. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So that one, again, it was with DDC. So once in a while, what was fun is that they would send me a script for specific projects. So this project was, there's a beautiful Baha'i temple in Wilmette, Illinois, so next to Chicago. And it's the only Baha'i temple in North America. And they were kind of renovating their welcoming center where people go before they actually go into the temple, so that there would be a video, an introductory video as to the history of the temple and a little bit of the history as to what generally Baha'i temples are and what they represent to the Baha'i faith and to its community. And the history also of some of the people that helped build it. For example, the son of Baha'u'llah, who is the manifestation of God, who basically founded the Baha'i faith. His son was there to place the first stone of the foundation of the temple. So that's in the video, for example, or some images of him in what year was he there? I know he was in Montreal in 1912, so it must have been around that time too for Chicago. So that video had an actual a script that was written out, and so they sent me the script. And so instead of telling me we need this type of mood, that type of mood, they sent me the script and the approximate timing of the scenes, and then they said, go with your gut as to what you think the mood needs to be for these scripts. So that was different and it was interesting. And I really enjoyed it because it wasn't just me writing the track and sending it out and having the editors cut up the music, they would send it back to me with the video and say, okay, cool, this is where we put your music. Now, can you make it work a little more intricately within the image that you see? Or like, as you can hear, maybe this section is a little too loud, depending on what's going on with the dialogue. Can you take the texture from 2 minutes later and like put it under the dialogue so that it works better? Things like that. So then it really became an interactive, collaborative scoring project. And I really enjoyed doing that.
Beautiful. Well, let's take a listen. You sent me a piece called, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Turlut?
Yes, Turlut, yeah.
Nice, pretty close. Tell me about this one. I was pleasantly surprised with like the corporal percussion that I heard in it. It reminded me a lot of Barbatuques, this Brazilian group that does a lot of just like body percussion and vocal percussion.
Oh, cool.
And also, if I understand, I mean, unless it was a different language, but it was all, I don't know if this is just a jazz term, like using scat. Like, is there a more proper term to say this? Like where you're not saying any words per se?
That's exactly what's happening. You totally hit it on the nail.
Got it.
This is an example. I'm very French. What's the expression? You hit it on the head of the nail. What's the expression?
I'm so bad with expressions as well.
Okay, never mind. Anyway, so I'm
with American expressions and Colombian expressions.
Okay. So,
but yeah, hit the head. I think hit the nail on the head.
Hit the nail on the head. I even tried it out today. This expression. So I thought I remembered it clearly. I did not. Anyway, so I'm French Canadian, and this is part of the traditional music that we do. It's not just the French Canadians who do this. It's a lot of cultures will have some sort of scat. Like you said, like it's not jazz scat specifically, but it's the best term we have right now to explain what it is. So it's very similar to the ones you'll hear also in Scotland and England, and Ireland, I guess. Specifically because of all of the immigration we had from those countries during the 1800s, 1700s even. And it kind of mixed in with the French traditional things that we had from France. And so French Canadians are a big mishmash of all kinds of just Western European cultures. So that type of tradition comes from not having an instrument and wanting to have some instrumental music. So people who knew some fiddle tunes, so main instruments in French Canadian traditional music originally was the fiddle, and then it moved on to accordion, button accordion, guitar in the 60s, 70s, et cetera, but it really was it was fiddle. So if you wanted to have a tune and you didn't have a fiddle around with you, you would still sing the same fiddle tune that's played for an instrument, but instead you would put different syllables to kind of put different emphases on syncopations or accents or things like that. So for example, the most common syllables are tas and das. So you would have ta for an accented note, da dee da for other notes that are not so accented. You can do diddle-dee-dum for bits that are fast, so the L kind of becomes its own note, diddle-dum or diddle-dee-dum.
Like to bridge.
Yeah, to bridge between, yeah. One that we use sometimes is the tss. So on an offbeat, we're going to put kind of like a little hi-hat sound there. Yeah. accompanied with that, often what happens is you'll have either wooden spoons that you would just do kind of a, I don't know if you can hear this. Was
Nice.
was that audible?
Hands?
Yeah, it was with my hands. So you could, do I have spoons? I have spoons. Where are they?
Go for it.
Edit.
Yeah.
All right, here are my spoons. I had to go and reach them out of my violin case. So that's your basic rhythm. So if you didn't have a pair of spoons with you and you didn't have a fiddle, then you would do that same rhythm with your feet. And that's what you're going to hear in Turlut. So you'll have the feet going down like that.
Wait, interruption. Not
Yes.
many people carry spoons in their violin case.
They're wooden spoons, and I play a lot of fiddle music, so I always have my pair of spoons with me. But yeah, you'll do the feet. It's also to imitate the big Irish drum that you've heard in the La Belle Françoise. The big drum that you heard, that's the big frame drum that Irish usually hold and play with a stick, and it has this beautiful deep sound. So when the French Canadians heard that sound, sure, they had the spoons, but then they're like, hey, we want to do that sound too. So you could kind of imitate it with your feet too. So
Definitely.
You'll also hear Irish musicians do it with their feet. And now there's so much cross-pollination between Quebecois, French Canadian, Acadian music, and then Scottish and Irish, that it's all over the place. Like, we don't really know who started what. There are actually people studying this as their doctoral studies, trying to figure out who started the foot stomping. We don't know.
Can you help me clarify something with the terms violin and fiddle? Now, in my mind, I have an understanding of it as in like violin, the word violin you hear in the context of like orchestral music or in the majority of types. But then fiddle, you hear it with like Irish, maybe Scottish music, even in Southern American music. What's going on here? Because it's the same instrument. Why do we have two words for it?
It's just for the style. So you'll, if you're doing classical music or stage music that is not a traditional type of music that usually uses a violin / fiddle, then we call it a violin. If it's a traditional piece that usually uses the same stringed instrument, we will call it a fiddle. And that's only in English. In French, it's called violon, no matter what.
Okay.
So there's also a feeling or a belief somewhere in there, and this is where we need to ask the ethnomusicologists, that a cheaper instrument will be called a fiddle.
Uh-huh.
That's what it used to be back in the day. Nowadays, people will fiddle on their Stradivarius. So
Yeah.
it's more about the style.
I would be very interested to look that up even more, because I wonder if there's any association with like class,
Oh, there definitely is. Yeah, they're used to. Nowadays, not so much, because it's cool to fiddle, and in certain circles anyway. But back then, I'm sure there was, yeah.
Let's go to another piece that you sent me called Nordavind. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Tell me about it. This is very different. What I could hear was much more theatrical. There's this sort of like narrator, like not singing, but sort of like shouting out.
As we rise, as we rush, and straight to the sky.
So this is back when I joined a choir to learn to write for choirs a little better. I learned a lot because the conductor was very ambitious and just loved to give people opportunities. And so when he learned that I was actually in the choir to write for choir, he gave me a lot of a lot of things to do. And one of the crazy projects that came out of that was Os for Vinden, which I'm not saying properly. It's the Norwegian tale of East of the Sun and West of the Moon. And we had dancers, which is the thumping you'll hear. It's the dancers running around on stage. We had a storyteller, and then we had solo violin, who is playing on a Stradivarius, and I made her fiddle in previous pieces, and solo cello. And then you had the female choir. And basically, in the story itself, I love the story because it had a specific point in the story where the girl that's about to go and save her prince, which is a complete role of reversal here, and she asks the help of the four winds in the story. What happens in the story is that it only describes the north wind, which is this piece that you have here on the podcast, but it doesn't describe the three other brothers, the three other like south wind, the west wind, and the east wind. Hence
the name Nordavind, like wind.
So and that's north. It. So the north wind. That movement you have is the last movement with the north wind. In the story, the north wind actually gets her to her lover so that she can save him. And it had such energy and like raw intensity in it. I just loved the imagery. So what I did is that I created a piece for each of the winds, and then I did a little prologue, also a very short one, and it still wasn't enough. So then our conductor basically said, let's add a storyteller in there. And I thankfully, I knew a storyteller who was really good at spinning tales, and he got to basically start telling the story. And as he was telling the story up to the point of the winds, it was just him on stage and us kind of getting ready on stage. And then once he got to the wind section, then I had the lines he had to say and when to say during the music. And keep in mind, he's not a musician, so he didn't know how to read musical scores. He had to memorize this by ear. It was amazing, the job he did. And then the dancers had to learn stuff. Anyway, it was so much fun. And then he finishes the story once we're done with the north wind.
But so this composition was meant for live performance.
Yes. So this is a live performance, and it was only performed once, which makes me so sad.
And that's what we're hearing in the recording.
Yes. So that's the recording of the performance. And it's all, I have a storyteller there because I don't like writing lyrics. I do not feel like I'm a poet. I like taking other people's poems and reacting to them. But to create text for the other winds, I had to create my own. And I felt a little self-conscious, and I realized, hey, I could go and find a professional translator and get it translated into Norwegian, which is the story's origin. And so no one in the audience could understand Norwegian here in Montreal anyway. So that's why we threw in a storyteller in there later on.
Going to another composition of yours, Terre-Neuve.
Yes, Terre-Neuve.
How do you say it?
Terre-Neuve.
Okay, I was way off.
No worries.
This one's interesting. This is a youth choir. Is that right? And
it's not a youth choir.
This is a youth orchestra.
It's a youth orchestra, yeah.
Singing.
Yes.
Not playing instruments.
Yes.
Tell me about this.
So cool. So it's the National Youth Orchestra. And every year they have
of which country? Sorry?
Of Canada. So that's
and
every year they have a few concerts in Canada, and then they have a tour depending which country and where or which continent. It changes from year to year. And a couple of years ago, but on top of that, what they do is that they have a training program before the actual tour. So they learn the music, but they also have tutors coming in and teaching them specific things. And one thing they insist on teaching them is singing together. So what they'd been doing the previous years for a long time is that they would sing madrigals from old stuff that was not copyrighted, so they could do it, no problem. But the kids really got sick of it. So they would never sing them seriously or take them seriously enough. And that kind of at a certain point, when one of the new tutors for the singing came along and he said, what we do in the choir world, we don't, we kind of tend to highlight new music, and actually we tend to commission new composers all the time. So why don't we commission pieces for your orchestra and then sing it as an encore for your concert? And they bought it. They were like, oh, that's awesome. So what's really cool is that these I call them kids, they're from 15 to 26 years old. And maybe they don't have great singing voices to their own personal standards. The thing is, they're very in tune. Their rhythmic knowledge is fantastic, and their harmonic knowledge is fantastic. Like, they're fantastic musicians all around. So as long as I respected a fairly constricted vocal range, everything else I could just do whatever the heck I wanted. Much. Yeah.
And even in the middle of it, there's like a little bit of, again, of that corporal percussion.
I tend to do that often. I really enjoy.
Am I like sensing a trend here?
Yes, you are. I love rhythm, and that's the only thing about choir that we can stand and sing all we want, but I feel like singing also includes movement. There needs to be movement to some point in time, and it just enhances the singing so much more, which is difficult in choir because a lot of choirs tend to have their noses in their music. It's not that the conductors want them to do that, but it's the natural instinct. If you have your music in your hands, you're going to be looking at it. And so very few groups push their singers to learn stuff by heart. But once the stuff is by heart, you can move, you can dance, you can do. Yeah, it's fantastic. And it just brings so much more life.
You can feel it.
Yeah. So,
and I think that's a big critique in general of like classical music. I mean, I don't want to generalize this, but in general, music that is read, is that it's harder to feel, right?
Yeah.
So would you agree with this? I'm not so used to reading music, but tell me more about like your perspective on it.
It does feel that way. What I found really interesting with orchestras, to a certain degree, like the more professional you get, the more they know this stuff. So they'll have the music there just as a guideline, just in case. And then when you go with younger orchestras or more amateur orchestras, they have more rehearsals, so they'll learn it more. So they'll still have the music as a guideline in front of them, but they'll know it fairly well. So it's not too bad. But when it comes to choirs, I find it's really difficult to have words and have people singing these words, but not connecting with the audience with their eyes. It's very difficult. I find it's like this barrier. So I don't mind it so much with instrumental music, but with vocal music, I find I really need the music to be out of the way, the physical score to be gone.
I mean, especially since vocals it's the most intimate instrument, right? I mean, and so if there isn't that eye-to-eye connection, some of that intimacy perhaps is lost.
And it's not just the intimacy, it's the words when you're talking to someone.
Sure.
You need that eye contact. Otherwise,
to convey the message.
Yeah, it's part of it. It's this human nature. We're looking for it. I'm sure there's possibly a psychological or neurological reason for this, but for me as a musician, as a human, I find I need that eye contact. I find when someone speaks to me with sunglasses that are kind of mirror sunglasses, I can't. I cannot connect with them, and I find I have a little bit of distress when they're. So I'll just make my friend or my partner just take their sunglasses off. I can't. So I feel that in music too, and very often the music that I'll write, if I write with text, there's a reason I chose that text. There's a reason that I'm doing all this musical stuff around the text. You'll hear the corporal percussion in Terre-Neuve because this is about Newfoundland, which is a small island province here in Canada that is very craggy and rocky and full of icebergs and all this stuff. And that it's basically just a poem about the geology of this island, which is really raw and powerful. And at that moment, there's a glacier that is snapping and breaking. And that's what that clap and stomp is. It's basically
representing that.
If you ever hear a glacier break, you'll hear kind of a very low resonant thud, and then you'll hear the snap, and that's what I have happening in the piece.
Beautiful. I mean, to me, it reminds me of, at least like your reasoning behind using it, just reminds me of like African choral music, like African choirs, and even newer, like what you would say with like gospel choirs, where very much there's more of this, not so much reading, it's much more felt, and there's a lot of percussive elements, including clapping. Do you have any particular, like any direct link to these sorts of roots? Like, is it sort of conscious?
It's not conscious. I just feel like I need more rhythm and I need more movement in my choral music, probably from singing a lot of choral music. And I actually know I can go back to film music. It can be very dramatic. You can throw whatever instrument you want in the score to get the mood that you want. And something I absolutely love is just the big bass drums and like very well used percussion here and there just to have a rhythm going. And you can't do that with a cappella choral music. So
Sure.
I'm trying to find all these other sounds you can create. And I had this crazy piece that I just wrote. I just spent a residency in Banff, the Banff Arts Center up in Canada in the snowy mountains. And I was challenged to write a piece without words. And I found that I really went and tried to get a lot of percussive elements and a lot of sound effects that I wouldn't normally go and get. Anyway, I'm always looking for different sounds other than just beautiful, pure chords, which seems to be the trend in choral music these days.
Let's look at another piece of yours called Blinded by a Leafy... I can't read my own handwriting.
Crown. Blinded by a
Crown.
leafy crown. Yeah.
Blinded by a Leafy Crown. I have a few questions about it. One, what are some of the words being sung?
Oh, yeah. The text is a poem by Sarah Teasdale, and the poem itself is called Leaves. But Blinded by a Leafy Crown is one of the central lines of the poem itself, which is why I changed the title. So I'll just go here. It goes like this. One by one, like leaves from a tree, all my faiths have forsaken me. But the stars above my head burn in white and delicate red, and beneath my feet, the earth brings the sturdy grass to birth. So it's basically a poem about losing faith in something and then being awakened to something new. And I just found this poem so beautiful. And so I'm a big sucker for natural imagery to start with. But on top of that, she's talking about losing faith in something. And then instead of being depressed about it, she's looking around and going, oh, look at all this entire beautiful world I get to rediscover because I'm no longer blinded by my preconceived notions. Let's discover this.
I was trying to pick out the voices in the choir. Is it an all-female choir?
Yes, it is. I have to be careful. It's treble voices. There's a couple of people that are not women in the group.
Can you tell me a little bit, like from a composer's standpoint, when do you choose a particular choir? Let's say all female, all male. a mix, a boys choir, a youth choir, etc.?
Depends on the thematic of the concert being held, and of course, it goes from it's going to be the opposite. It's more, what choir do I have, and then from there, what can I do with it?
Compose for them.
Yes, exactly. Because
and can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Why would you compose differently for a boys choir than a female choir or a male choir?
So thematics, so technically, I mean, the ranges are slightly different. So if you want between a women's choir and a boys choir is going to have slightly different ranges. There's going to have a lot of boys with voices that are potentially changing, and you have to be careful with that. I'm not so well versed with those technical requirements, though I'm starting to learn more about them. What happens also is that because there's a lot of music written for boys' choirs or children's choirs, that music is then given to all the women's choirs saying, hey, this is in your range, you can sing these. But in fact, there is very little choral music that is written specifically for women's choir. So taking into consideration actually the richness of the voice of women's choir. For boys' choirs and children's choir, there's more of a crystal pure sound that comes out of these groups, whereas a women's choir is going to be much warmer and richer, and you can go and get slightly lower notes, and when you go and get higher notes, they're going to be much more powerful, for example.
Right.
So with that in mind, and then with the group in mind, who is this ensemble? What do they seem to care about? In general, let's say if it's a women's choir, in this poem, I mean, it continues, from what I've read, it continues saying, I who was content to be but a silken singing tree, but a rustle of delight in the wistful heart of night. So it seems that one of her beliefs was that just to be pretty and just to be someone that pleases others is enough. And then that's one of the beliefs that she has lost. I think this resonates so much with a lot of women, and I'm sure with a lot of men too, but it felt just like the appropriate type of topic to approach with a women's choir.
Beautiful. What would you say is the purpose of music? We've been talking about it for a while now, but what's the purpose of it?
Oh boy. There's so much in that question. Personally, I find that music has a lot of different purposes, but I find unanimously within these purposes that it kind of opens up, it really does open up a door to your soul with music. Either you'll have some things within you that are hidden that are going to come out. So either the music can be used as a emotional catharsis to dig deeper and find and think or experience something that is within you that needs to come out, or it can help you process things. I find that when music is used for the greater good, and there's so many ways to do this, it really has a very strong impact. I find that music with lyrics tends to strengthen a message. So I find that it can, I don't know, it can definitely, it kind of brings text, a message, and then it makes it that much more powerful. It feels like music really makes us more open to a message. It puts us more into a meditative state, or into a state willing to open and consider something new, something different.
What suggestions would you have, or tips would you have for composers, young composers who are wanting to do what you do?
For both film and choir, I would say just get into the community. So if you are wanting to write choral music, first off, join a choir and then see if you can write for them. Get to know who are all the choirs around in your neighborhood, in your community, and just offer to write stuff. Depending at the level you're at, it might be for free. And I have to say that a big chunk of music I wrote for my portfolio, even once I had finished studying in my master's degree, I wrote it for free. And it's not easy, but if you find that it has one of the 3 potential options here, it's worth it. So you always have to consider if it's worth working with the people, with those people specifically. You need to see if you will get financially compensated. So at this point, no. And then you have to see if the project itself will bring you a step further into your personal artistic development. And so I always made sure that I had, other than the step of financial, you always need 2 of those steps to make the stool stand kind of idea. It's like 3 legs of a stool. You need at least 2 to stand. So if the financial side is not there, it has to be with people you want to work with, that you're excited to work with, and it has to be something that your artistic practice will then grow from there. So you'll learn something, or you'll develop a new technique, and that goes the same for film music. Find people to work with. You can't do film music alone. You have to be part of a community. So find who are the people who are making film. Find people who are your age making film. If you feel like you can cold call other people that are completely out of your league just in case, but it's so much more worth it to just create that community, create those group of friends with whom then you'll always come back to and create more because you enjoy doing it together.
MarieClaire, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I feel like there's just so many other things I would love to touch on, but yeah, it was
Thank
definitely
you
a
for
pleasure.
inviting me.
MarieClaire, where can people contact you or see more of your work?
So if you type out my full name anywhere, MarieClaire Saindon. So my website is my full name with no hyphen, no dot, just all the 3 names squished together, MarieClaireSaindon.com. And you will find all of a big chunk of my music there. Apparently I haven't put enough of my film music or videos up yet, so I need to work on that. Otherwise, I am on Facebook. You can find me if you search my name. I'm learning how to use Instagram. So eventually there's going to be more material coming out on that one. But that's, and you can email me through my website, or you can write to me through Facebook and write to me through Instagram. That one I'm going to respond less just because I keep forgetting that messaging is possible in Instagram. It's just,
no worries.
I'm new at this.
MarieClaire, thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Daniel.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And why don't we do a little good public service? And so that others can also enjoy it, you can give the podcast a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever other podcast app you're using. This will allow for more people to find the podcast. And of course, you can always share it on your Facebook, on your Instagrams, on your Twitters, on whatever other platforms you're using. I would also appreciate if you just take a minute and send me a message, whether on Instagram or whatever. Tell me, what have you thought of the podcast so far? What episodes have you liked and why? And what else would you like to hear? As always, I send you much love, but especially during these times, I do wish you peace, hope, calm, and serenity. Take care.